Okay, so now at this stage, we're going to create a new brush and we're going to do a refined painting layer. So let's kind of go over how the setup works and what we're looking for. Basically, we want to be able to stay on the brush the whole time we're painting. It just saves us a lot of time and energy instead of moving between tools. We want to see our reference clearly as we're painting. And we want to be able to get around our image pretty quickly and see it from a distance even when we're zoomed in. So far with my flat color painting, I've stayed at this view, seeing the whole thing on the screen. But as I do more refined painting with the next layer, I'm going to need to zoom in a lot. So let's go over our shortcuts. I'm going to call a brand new layer on top of my flat color, the refined paint layer. Sometimes it's called rendering. But that's where we're going to put the textures. That's where we're going to put the shadows. We're going to mix colors. And I'm going to try to keep it really simple, but sometimes digital painters will have many levels of this. They'll have one for shadows, one for highlights, and there are good reasons for playing with it that way. I'm going to lock my underpainting, and I'm going to turn off my sketch, because now that's not so necessary. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a duplicate of my background, blank white layer, and I'm going to fill it instead, edit fill, with 50% gray. So that now those colors that seemed really dark on a white background, I can see their color more fully, and I can see highlights and shadows. And notice the little white in the eye, that had to be painted in. That's not coming from the background. So anything that wasn't, any whites that weren't filled in are now filled in with middle gray, right? On a separate layer. And I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer. I also have what's called the navigator open. And this is the default for the essentials. You have the navigator, you have swatches, and you have your layers. And then I have history up here in case I ever make big mistakes and have to go back. Remember, we set up Photoshop under performance, preferences and performance to remember 500 states. So it will remember 500 brushstrokes because those go by quickly. And you will all find that at some point, if you didn't lock your layers, you will have done close to 500 brushstrokes on the wrong layer, right? And you'll want to take it back in your history. And so that's why we do it that way. Okay, so now to do more refined stuff, to zoom in, this is where the navigator comes in. And if you don't see the navigator, go to Window, find Navigator, and click on it. So you get that check mark. The navigator allows you to zoom in very easily. It also allows you to move around without even having to hit the space bar and click and drag. Right? You can just do it right on the navigator no matter what tool you're using. And honestly, the most important reason that you use it when you're doing a digital painting is so that even when you're zoomed in, you can still see your image from a distance. Right? So you're always thinking of the bigger picture. And you're only trying to do things with your digital painting that you can see in this view. And if it's helpful, you can make your navigator a little bit bigger by widening up that column. Right? Because I don't need a whole lot of layers for this, but I do need to see my navigator clearly. All of it's going to be under Window. So Swatches is another one. So these are the ones I like to have. The navigator, swatches, and layers. And swatches will just remember the last colors you used. You see how it does that at the top? So if you're not saving them off to the side, or if you don't want to steal them from yourself, you can also find them there. All right. So now, onto the refined painting layer. Now, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to refine paint just with a littler brush and to start painting, individual hairs. You could do it, but that's like MS Paint days. That's really not the best way to go about it. So instead, we're going to use a custom brush for this. Something that gives us the texture, the feel we want. And that doesn't look so digital necessarily. Or if you want it to look digital, it looks extra digital. So I'm going to go back in my history, get rid of all those strokes. And instead, on this refined painting layer, we're going to use a custom brush. And I have lots of them. Something like this. Whoa, right? But notice, even if it's the coolest shape ever, if you just use it the way it is, it looks very artificial, right? So I'm going to save it where it is, and I'm actually going to open up a new file. This is how we're going to make our own brush. Okay? And then I'll show you how to use a brush. So this video is all about customizing a brush. So File, New. We are going to make a new Photoshop file that's only 1,000. No, let's do 2,000. 2,000, sometimes I do 4,000, but 2,000 should serve. 2,000 by 2,000 pixels. That's going to be as large as the brush can be. Right? Doesn't matter how much your resolution is because pixels are pixels.
Say that again.
So we're going to say File, New,
Right.
and we're going to create a new Photoshop document that's 2,000 by 2,000 pixels. It doesn't matter what the resolution is set to because we're doing it in pixels, not inches. And you can name it your name, custom brush FA17 for fall 2017. Background content white, that's just fine. Then say OK. So I have this nice square here. I'm going to change my color to the defaults, so black in the foreground, white in the background. You always design a brush with black on white. And then you just want something that has texture to it. So I'm going to do that a little bit. I might play with these other custom brushes, which were just scans of ink. And think of it like sponge painting. I'm avoiding the corners because this is my brush.
Are you making these up or are these presets?
These are all presets that I have, and you have a lot of presets too. You have
Oh, I see.
little sparkles. You could do something, you can play with the size and the opacity. But I always keep it at 100% opacity, and you'll see why. So this is one of the built-in Photoshop brushes. And it's not bad to use the built-in ones, but I'm going to teach you a lot about it by having you make your own. And then maybe I'll change it to white and I'll erase away from the brush a little bit. Or let's go to the fan brush. Ooh. And erase away with that. And then I can go back to painting with black. Now basically you just want your brush to have some texture to it. So if there's anywhere that's just too solid, go ahead and paint that out. But you want your brush to be only black or white to get the most use out of it. All right, so there's a brush. Now, how do I save it? I say, Edit, Define Brush Preset. And then it will take the file name, Carl Custom Brush, Fall 2017, and I'll say OK. And immediately it lets me play with it. So what this did is it just added this new brush to the very end of my list, right? So now I'm on my brush, and notice how big it is. It's basically 2,000 by 2,000 pixels. And that's a cool brush. It's like little cartoony clouds. But again, if I don't customize it, it will look very, digital. You go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. That's all it takes. You give it a name, and then it's saved. And then you can close it. You don't even need to save it, because as long as you use it and then save a file where you used it, your Photoshop will remember it. Okay, so now I've got my brush, but the problem is it's just like all the other brushes we've used. I can definitely take its size down, right? I don't need it to be so big. But is this brush all that much better than just the circle? No, not the way it is. So let's customize it. And we do that through brush settings, which you can find under Window and Brush. Right? It's also the little paint can of brushes off to the side. So I have my brush preset selected. Now, the first thing you want to play with, for sure, because we're using a tablet, is Shape Dynamics. So click on Shape Dynamics. Give it a bit of a size jitter. Jitter means that it will not always be exactly the same. Just like when you're using a regular brush, it won't always spit out as much paint. And then you want to change the control of the size jitter to your pen pressure. And now all of a sudden, I can go thin, I can go thick. Right? That's very helpful.
What percent would you?
It's completely up to you. You'll play with it and you'll figure it out.
Okay.
If you do a crazy size jitter, it won't be very predictable though. You see, it will kind of swell up without you meaning for it to.
I've gone on the layer, I've rasterized the layer, I picked the brush and nothing will come over. What am I doing wrong?
I do not know,
Okay.
but I will come and check. So the first thing we want to do is play with Shape Dynamics. All right, so now I have a brush that goes thick to thin based on how hard I press. The next thing you want to play with is your angle jitter. And this is incredibly important because a big part of your brush is that you don't want it to be symmetrical all the time. Right? So if I change it to black so you can see, I hit it there, I hit it there, I hit it there. You see how the angle changes on it? It's not always going to be the same. So as you're painting with it, the edges will be more naturally irregular. And then the control of the angle jitter, if you're using a more expensive tablet than we are, you can make that based on the tilt of the pen, but ours doesn't support that, which is why you get this little warning. And then the roundness jitter, you can decide how much it rounds off the pixels. The minimum diameter, you can say, I don't want it to ever get too thin, which is kind of useful. And that's just Shape Dynamics. The next one that I'll often use is scattering. And scattering is I'll just scatter it a tiny bit with a bit of a count jitter. So that when you paint with it, it will stutter a little bit and it won't build up quite so much. And you'll see how all of this makes a difference. And then something else that's kind of fun to play with is the texture. But it's not great to rely on it too much, but you can give kind of a dappled texture to it. And that will kind of build it into your brush as well. And that can help your edges. So with the pressure, you see how at the edges, even though it's a 100% opaque brush, it will have a slightly less opaque edge, which will help blend strokes. So this is very much kind of a pastel brush that I'm creating. Okay, so those are the brush properties that are now set with this brush. And you can modify any brush that way. So now, let's start some refined painting. What's the difference between the refined painting and the flat color? The big difference is that I'm going to stay on the paint tool, but I'm not going to be at 100% opacity. I'm going to be more at like 70%. And I will probably start by stealing colors from myself or from past choices, right? And then painting. But pretty soon I'm going to start zooming in. And this is called speed painting. We're going really fast at about 70%, stealing colors. And the difference is, I'm going to zoom in, I can use the navigator, or I can use Command+. And because I'm only at 70%, I start getting new colors very quickly. I'm pretty much building up colors in between the colors I already have.